Hello, everybody. My name is Kola Olofinboba. I'm a managing partner at Fairview Capital. And today I am having a conversation with Juliet Bakker, managing director and founder of Longitude Capital, one of the leading healthcare venture capital firms in the US. We will be talking about investments and investing in healthcare from a financial investor's perspective, as well as broader issues around the impact of COVID and the matter of inclusion or lack thereof in venture capital. Thank you, Juliet, for taking time to talk to us today. To start, please tell us about yourself and how you started working in venture capital.
Thank you, Kola, so much for inviting me to this session. I'm delighted to be able to speak with you today. So in terms of how my career got started after graduate school, I worked for 5 years in investment banking, first in M&A, and then in groups that covered healthcare and environmental services. And that's where I really learned that I so enjoy working with emerging growth companies. I found it really fun to work with the management teams of these companies to identify and articulate what was distinctive about their businesses so that we could help them access growth capital or achieve a meaningful sale outcome. I found it especially rewarding to work with the same companies over a few years and watch their growth and success. So that period really shaped my passion for working with young companies. Then my husband and I moved to Europe for a few years. I worked as a sell-side analyst in a bank and then as a director of strategic planning and operations at Waste Management International, which was the international subsidiary of the US company. They had expanded very aggressively outside the US, and my job was to help them turn around underperforming assets. That was a fascinating job, which helped me really understand where to look for weaknesses in a business. We came back to the US, and in 1997, I was offered the opportunity to start the healthcare venture practice at Pequot Capital, a large asset management firm based here in Connecticut. I did that for 10 years and then founded Longitude Capital with some colleagues in 2007. Since then, we've raised nearly $2 billion across 5 funds.
Thank you, Juliet. Maybe tell us a little bit about Longitude Capital. What you do, what makes it different from your peers in the industry?
Absolutely. I'd say one of the more unique aspects of our firm is that we have a very flexible investment strategy. So we invest in 3 sectors: biotech, medtech, and health solutions. We invest in any stage of a company's development, could be a startup to a fully commercial enterprise. We invest in privately held as well as publicly traded companies. We can invest in special situations like spinouts, recaps, and certain public company structures. We conduct extensive proprietary research to analyze sectors and therapeutic areas that we want to be investing in. And finally, we focus on investments that can deliver key value-creating milestones and attractive returns within 3 to 5 years. So we're quite IRR focused. In contrast, I would say many other firms are more sector or more stage focused. I'd also add that our firm is unusually diverse, and that is intentional. We are female owned. About 50% of our employees are women, and approximately the same number of employees self-report as affiliated with underrepresented groups.
Thank you, Juliet, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But first, wanted to talk a little bit about investment, present and past. What are you invested in today? And how do you view the investment landscape in healthcare today?
Sure. So we invest in biotech, medtech, and health solutions. I'm going to mention a few companies as examples, but our compliance department has asked me to remind folks to please visit the Longitude Capital website for a list of all of our investments. In biotech, we focus on platform technologies and oncology-focused drug development. These 2 areas have driven most of the fundraising, most of the higher valuations, and most of the IPO activity over the last few years, and we don't see that changing anytime soon. So an example of a platform technology that we invested in is a company called Telarus. Telarus has developed an innovative treatment that may transform the standard of care for solid organ transplantation. Currently, as you know, when you receive an organ transplant, you need to take immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of your life to suppress your immune system's desire to reject the transplant. These drugs have fairly negative side effects, even though they do allow you to keep the organ. Talaris has found a way to take stem cells from a living donor, transfer them into the recipient's marrow prior to surgery. That way, the recipient's bone marrow has both donor cells and recipient stem cells, and therefore they produce blood and immune cells of both donor and recipient origin. That way, when they see the transplant, they don't react to the transplant as a foreign object. So the objective is to ensure that the patient can get off immunosuppressant drugs within 12 months post-surgery. The company is enrolling a phase 3 trial for kidney patients. And if this is successful, it's a platform technology because it could be applied to other organ transplants. I'd add that in MedTech, we focus on cardiovascular disease and all conditions related to aging, since aging is an inevitability, and obviously the demographics are very much skewed that way. We also have an investment in a company called RxSight, which just went public in July, and which offers a cataract surgery solution that delivers improved vision over current products. Cataract surgery is the single most common surgery, since virtually everyone will eventually develop cataracts, and so it's a huge target market. In health solutions, our third category of investment, we're focused on the emergence of value-based care and the need for payers to find more effective and less expensive care models to take care of their covered lives. This need has created the opportunity for companies that offer specialty care for specific patient populations, and I can give you 2 examples from our portfolio. Somatis is a company that provides innovative care for patients with chronic kidney disease. So Somatic does everything to surround the patient with care through the use of predictive analytics, better field care, home-based dialysis and care to prevent these patients progressing to dialysis and then even progressing potentially to kidney transplant. A company called Wellbe Health is similarly focused on a particular patient population, but that population are vulnerable seniors who have coverage through Medicare and Medicaid. And obviously, managing cost in that patient population, as with other patient population, is very significant. So we try to keep elderly patients in their homes and in their communities and out of the ER. You can appreciate how that would have been particularly important during COVID. The management's team has kept COVID infection rates among Wellbe's participants significantly below the national average. And in fact, mortality rates among Wellbe's patients were 3 times lower than nursing homes and 2 times lower than other PACE organizations as of the second half of this year. So we're very excited about those opportunities, and those are a direct result of people starting companies to deliver better care more cost effectively.
Thank you for those very illustrative examples, which each in its own way could be tremendously disruptive, to healthcare as we know it today, and significantly moves the bar in that particular area in terms of the quality of care and the cost of care. Now, if we went back, a few years and said, what were you invested in at that time? What might we look at today? What companies are there today that you had invested in several years ago that are changing how we experience healthcare today?
I'm so glad you asked that. That is one of the most rewarding things about investing in healthcare startups, is to watch these companies grow and deliver solutions that really matter to people's health. So as you know, peanut allergy is a big problem, especially with children. In severe cases, unintended exposure can result in ER visits or death. And in the US, about 32 million Americans have food allergies, of which 5 million are children, and just over 6 million of these individuals are specifically allergic to peanuts. We invested in 2013 in a company called Aimune. We spun it out of a nonprofit for food allergy research. And Aimune developed Palforzia, which is now the world's first approved drug therapy for peanut allergy in children. It was recently bought by Nestlé Health Sciences, and so now Nestlé is responsible for the distribution of the drug. It will not cure a peanut allergy, but it will desensitize children to the peanut allergen. And that means that they will experience significantly fewer extreme responses to exposure. So this is really a quality of life altering drug for those who are allergic to peanuts and their families who are constantly seeking to protect them from exposure. The second company is a medical device company. It's called Axonics, which leads to urinary incontinence and also fecal incontinence. So the Urology Care Foundation reports that approximately 40% of women and 30% of men in the US suffer from overactive bladder. And overactive bladder and fecal incontinence often go together. So this is a large and growing unmet need that manifests itself particularly for those 55 and over. Axonics has miniaturized a rechargeable implant that provides a comfortable and convenient solution for patients. Axonics, in its first full year of sales, did over $100 million. So there's obviously a lot of demand for the product.
Thank you. Again, very illustrative examples of disruptive technologies that are changing people's lives for the better. To change gears a little bit, wanted to talk about the healthcare investment environment, and wanted to ask you, what are the biggest changes you're seeing or expect to see in healthcare over the next few years?
I'd say in general, we expect to see more of a continuing trend rather than big changes, because there have already been some very meaningful changes over the last 10 years, and we expect those to continue. In particular, in biotech, the convergence of technological advancements and scientific breakthroughs and computing power is driving a new level of patient-specific diagnostics and patient-specific treatments. And we expect that to continue, and it's driving a tremendous amount of innovation. At Longitude, that translates for us into a focus on 3 areas. One is precision oncology. So we now have a significant advancement in our understanding of the genetic drivers of disease, and that leads us to be able to identify highly validated genetic targets in oncology and therapeutics to target these genetic alterations. By background, oncology as a therapeutic area generates more investments, more exits, both M&A and IPO, than any other segment within the biotech industry, accounting for approximately 34% of all venture capital dollars, or about $7 billion, spent in biotech in the first half of this year alone. So this is a big area of focus for us. A second really interesting area is targeted radiotherapy. So TRT is a type of cancer therapy that attaches a radioactive payload to a molecule to enable the precise and selective killing of tumor cells. TRT represents a very attractive area to invest in now. There are a few companies that are pursuing that, and there have been a significant number of high-value M&A deals. And we've recently invested in a company called Alpha 9 that is pursuing this for prostate cancer. A third category that we're continually looking at is next generation genomics and discovery tools. Those are the tools that empower research and high volume analyses. And we have a number of investments under evaluation in that area. Moving to medtech, I'd say that there's a continuing need to develop solutions that improve access and care, reduce costs, and improve information flow. In particular, we're seeing more traditional medtech devices being updated to include AI or telehealth connectivity to deliver better care. One example of that is a company that we invested in called Cerebell. So now if you arrive after a traumatic accident or a stroke at the ICU or the emergency department, it can take up to 4 hours to get an EEG, which is the diagnostic tool that hospitals use to assess what's going on in your brain, whether your brain is injured. So what happens with people who've had traumatic events, they could be experiencing non-convulsive seizures. So you don't know they're seizing because you can't see it, but their brain is seizing, which is obviously very bad news. Waiting 4 hours to detect that is obviously not a good thing, but that is the national average. Cerebell has developed a rapid point of care EEG that can be operated by a nurse, that is available in the ICU and the ED, doesn't have to get transported from another area of the hospital, and that gives results in 5 minutes. The nurse can read the results, and the company is also working on a telehealth service whereby if there is no nearby nurse, that a remote reader could tell the hospital what is happening with this patient. Other areas in medical devices that will remain top areas for innovation include urology, ophthalmology, non-opioid pain management, obviously, given the significant unmet needs in clinical and quality of life options in those areas. And an area that we've looked at very closely involves surgical robotics. I'm sure you've heard of Intuitive, which has been a very successful surgery robotics company. And increasingly, we're seeing augmented visualization in the OR, tools that will allow surgeons to see more clearly in their field of operation through the use of IT. And then finally, I'd say within health solutions, we expect to see a continued evolution of this theme around value-based care models, improved workflow solutions, because there's tremendous inefficiency in the workflows, and solutions to enhance clinical trial efficacy, because everything we can do to make clinical trials faster reduces cost and brings forward treatments. And, you know, the development of the COVID vaccine is a phenomenal example of how quickly that can happen. So I mentioned Somatus as a company that focuses on kidney care. Wellbe focuses on the eligible population. We recently invested in Cortica, which delivers a similar concept in terms of centralized, tech-enabled neurologist care for children with autism. Currently, parents of children with autism have to go to all kinds of different centers and kind of cobble together the treatment for the child, and Cortica brings that all together in one place. Workflow solutions, I mentioned. There's tremendous inefficiency in communications, in particular between providers and payors. I'm sure you're aware of the complexity of getting pre-authorized drugs or pre-authorized surgeries. And we've invested in a company that uses AI fully automated to facilitate and speed up that process. So that should save patients and hospitals and payers a lot of time. And in life sciences solutions, I mentioned, you know, the computing capacity and developments are really just extraordinary, and we continue to look at opportunities in that area as well.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about the opportunities, and I was wondering if we could maybe spend a little bit of time talking about, you know, the challenges, the biggest challenges that you see in healthcare venture capital right now.
Well, I'd start on the optimistic side, which is that we're very excited about the state of venture capital right now. We're entering the 10th year of a sustained bull market in life science and medical technology equities. And the health solutions sector in particular has really emerged in the last 36 months as a source of exits and IPOs rather than just investment. We're really seeing these enterprises scale now. I'd say the pandemic has only accelerated investor and consumer interest in telemedicine platforms and the use of artificial intelligence and predictive analytics to deliver more efficient care. So, of course, we have to be careful about too much of a good thing. And we are mindful of the record amounts of capital entering the healthcare financing system. After years of healthcare venture capital being raised to the tune of about $3 to $4 billion a year, through 2013, we've seen returns in demand for healthcare VC expand consistently, with over $10 billion of healthcare VC funds in 2019 alone, almost $17 billion in 2020, and nearly $22 billion in the first half of 21. So we continue to watch very closely where and how these capital inflows could negatively impact investment and valuation discipline while still remaining active and engaged in our primary markets.
Thank you. We've seen a robust IPO market, and again, that's part of the success you just talked about. So for the last few years, it's been quite strong. And then there's been the recent reemergence of SPACs as a way to exit. As an experienced investor in both the public as well as in the private market, what's your perspective on the current public market trends in healthcare and life sciences?
Well, in general, we've seen IPO activity cool down a bit from the highs of 2020, particularly as big biopharma specialists in the public markets pull back a bit and generalist investors reevaluate consumer and retail companies that were ignored during the height of COVID. But IPOs are still happening at a pretty rapid clip. There were 50 biopharma IPOs in the first half of 21, and half of those were for drugs or platforms with either preclinical or phase 1 assets at the time of the offering. So that's pretty early. Post-IPO performance for the class of 21 is still positive, up 7%, although, but not really comparable to the IPO class performance of 2020 at 57%. So we're definitely seeing a little more caution going into the second half of this year. And investors are generally really focused on high growth investment opportunities and looking for those outside typical biotech for the time being in 21 also. There were 9 medtech IPOs in the first half of 21. The performance for those companies has been astonishing, 120% up. And in 2020, the performance was also very strong, 174%. I will say that in the medtech space, some of the earlier stage companies are being brought to market, and there is definitely less appetite on the buy side for very early stage medtech companies. They would prefer to find companies that have a little more demonstrated commercial track record. And in health solutions, there were 9 IPOs led by insurance and provider subsectors. Their performance has been flat-ish in 21 compared to 2020. But as I said earlier, this is a very big category. The companies are now achieving the scale that's required. We're seeing that in our own portfolio where they're reaching $50 million in sales or so. And that's the stage at which it's appropriate to bring a company public. So with regard to SPACs, the resurgence in 2020 of SPACs has resulted in all of these vehicles now looking for targets to de-SPAC with. Many of the SPACs that have completed their de-SPAC transactions have shown negative de-SPAC performance, even at a time when IPO performance has been strong. Furthermore, the IPO valuations in every healthcare subsector have on average been higher than their SPAC counterparts. So we've really seen that market cool as well, both in terms of sponsors, but I would say in particular of the PIPE investors. And the advantageous economics that were driving the sponsors to initiate the SPACs are being whittled away by the PIPE investors the more sophisticated they got and the more leverage they had. So, we've definitely seen a slowdown.
There have been a couple of references, as you have spoken, on the impact of the pandemic and COVID-19, but I was wondering if maybe you take a moment to speak specifically on what that impact has been on the healthcare investment landscape over the last 18 to 20 months.
COVID has definitely catalyzed a few trends in our investment landscape that will likely stay with us for some time. First, we've seen a reappreciation of infectious disease category in biopharma investors, especially as it relates to vaccine and antiviral therapy development. Vaccines are often winner-take-most markets and require very heavy capital investment. And so Longitude's approach has been fairly cautious in this regard, in particular as it relates to COVID investments. An area that we have invested in is pneumonia. We invested some years ago in a company called Vaxcyte. It's now publicly traded. It's developing a pneumonia vaccine that protects mostly children and vulnerable seniors from infection by 24 strains of pneumonia. If approved, Vaxcyte's vaccine would challenge Pfizer's and Merck's currently available but narrower spectrum vaccines for leadership of this multi-billion-dollar category.
So, Juliet, the other trend that's been, very pertinent over the recent past has been around diversity, equity, inclusion, and I know personally that Longitude has been very forward-thinking on this. So, just maybe want to talk a little bit about, what Longitude is doing to help build the venture capital ecosystem and improve inclusion into this historically more difficult asset class and career.
Yeah, this is, of course, a very important topic and one that's very near and dear to us. As an industry that propels innovation and change, all of us in venture capital have a responsibility to drive towards a more diverse professional employee base. And I would extend that to a more diverse professional employee base in our portfolio companies. So the most important thing we can do is to actuate this change and recruit more diverse candidates into our firms and our portfolio companies. So it all starts at home, right? So Longitude is female co-founded and co-owned. So diversity, equity, and inclusion are absolutely foundational to our firm. As I mentioned earlier, about half of our employees are female and about half are from underrepresented groups. This is a very intentional recruiting effort on our part. We're also committed to working in the industry to help develop a more socially diverse, equitable, and inclusive industry. And here are some of the activities that we're engaged in. We donate money to organizations like NVCA's Venture Forward and Seizing Every Opportunity to provide education, mentorship, and networking opportunities for underrepresented groups to break in the VC and financial services industries. We run a summer analyst program that we've been running since 2012, and we're a relatively small organization. We're about 34 employees, where every summer we invite 6 interns to spend 6 weeks with us to learn the fundamentals of finance and VC. They have been mostly women historically. And this year it was very exciting. One of our interns was actually a Seizing Every Opportunity participant from one of her universities. And she had been sponsored by Seizing Every Opportunity through high school to support her education, to support her application to the university, to support her entering the university environment, to support her academics at the university. So it was really exciting to actually have her in our group for the summer. We've also co-sponsored a new life sciences cohort under something called Venture Forward's VC University, a joint initiative of Startup at Berkeley Law and BCA and Venture Forward. That is a university, can be online, can be in person, to educate a new generation of VC investors. And a number of our managing directors have already participated in some of these online tutorials. We hold seats on the Bio Investor Advisory Committee, which is a network of biotech investment leaders where we advise management teams and board of directors on policy and other initiatives to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the biotech industry. And importantly, you don't know where you need to go unless you know where you're starting. And so we participated in the NVCA's 2020 VC Human Capital Survey. The survey aimed to develop this baseline that I mentioned to understand what are the demographics within the VC industry so that we now know what objectives we need to set to meaningfully move the needle.
Juliet, thank you very much for your time, for the breadth and depth of your responses. It's a pleasure being a partner with Longitude, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kola. It's been really enjoyable. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.